to another episode of Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. On this episode, I am thrilled to have Ryan O'Hanlon on the show. He is the author of the excellent book Net Gains about soccer analytics and soccer in general, and he writes for ESPN. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Always happy to be here.
The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting newsletter. Looking for some action on any given weekend? This is the free service for you, as 5 Nugget Saturday is my curated list of tips and analytics. To sign up for free, go to thepowerrank.com. Ryan, you've written this great book, Net Gains, about soccer and soccer analytics. What is the one thing that you want readers of that book to take home with them?
I think the main thing I want people to take home from the book is about soccer in particular, but like probably about everything, like both sports and like life, is how much randomness affects outcomes. I think soccer, more so than any sport, because it's so low scoring, because there's so few shots, because you're trying to kick a ball with a weirdly shaped foot past the only guy on the field who's allowed to use his hands. Like the outcomes of games are incredibly random. And then I also think the like performances in games are incredibly random, and what you see happen on the field is often just like a kind of garbled collection of different factors about how the players are feeling, what the weather is, the calls the refs making, how the grass is cut on the field, the different decisions the players made and how they kind of melded together on that day. So I think like just being less confident about what you're seeing when you watch a soccer game, that's kind of the overarching takeaway I want people to have when they read my book.
That's a great take home message. I think so often in soccer, just to say one example, like you talk about being clinical in your finishing. And when you talk about soccer analytics, you know, like you talk about it's actually not being clinical in finishing, right? If you want to score more goals, you actually should make more opportunities. So can you maybe explain that in terms of XG and things that you explain in the book?
Yeah. So sort of the like, it's like the sort of most valuable publicly available underlying metric for soccer. It's called expected goals. And essentially it just is an algorithm. Multiple different companies have different models, but roughly it's an algorithm that uses historical data to determine the conversion probability of a given shot based on where it was on the field, what kind of pass led to it, what body part it was with. Models are starting to include defender positioning, stuff like that. And this is useful because over time, pretty much the vast majority of players will regress toward their expected goals total. And on a team level, teams more so than players will regress toward their expected goals total. So when you kind of look at it, you take Messi, for example, greatest goal scorer ever, greatest finisher ever, but his total goals of his career for Barcelona, expected goals explains about 75% of his goal scoring. So this is just an algorithm that's looking where the shots are coming from, and it's predicting how many goals he would score just based on that, not knowing that it's Messi, right? So he added 25% extra goals based on his finishing, and he's like the greatest finisher ever, like by a wide margin. So even with that, 75% of why Messi scored so many goals is because, one, the quality of the shots he took, and two, the quantity of the shots he took.
25% seems huge, right?
Yes.
When you look at someone like Erling Haaland at Man City, he has scored way more goals than XG, right? But it's not like 25%.
No. 25 is huge. Maybe Messi like serves to confuse the example a little bit, but even like him, right, where 3/4 of his goal scoring is purely, you could predict it just by looking at where the shots are coming from and the number of shots, and not even knowing that Messi was the person taking the shots.
Right, you're explaining 75%, which is a ton. I definitely appreciate the message of how random soccer is, especially as my 12-year-old goes into a state cup game on Sunday And
no.
if there's randomness when adult men are playing soccer, there is I would guess more randomness when 12-year-olds are playing soccer. So I certainly appreciate that message. I also just want to say that your book Net Gains is excellent. I would highly recommend anyone to go out and read it if you're interested in soccer or if you're interested in analytics. And I actually think you do a really good job talking about soccer development for young players because that's part of the angle that you bring in. So I would highly recommend that people go check that out. Ryan, I wanted to bring you on to talk about the Champions League. We are headed into the quarterfinals. We have 4 excellent matches. Let's start with Man City versus Real Madrid. Man City doesn't seem like the same team that they were last year. They kind of struggled to a 0-0 tie against Arsenal not too long ago. Should they still be favored to win Champions League?
Yes, I think that they should. I think it's possible they're maybe a little over favored. I think they're like around plus 180
Yeah,
last that I looked,
that,
which I think is pretty low when you consider that they're playing Real Madrid. Then the winner of that game will play the winner of Arsenal and Bayern Munich, who are probably the third, somewhere between the second and fourth best teams, um, to even just get to the final. So you're not um, you're playing another set of 2 games rather than like just getting 1 game against one of those teams, which I think would make it harder to make it to the final. But and in the Premier League, as you said, Manchester City are currently in 3rd place. Basically every season when Pep Guardiola has been at Manchester City, I don't know why I said basically, because it's literally every season since he's been at Manchester City, they've had the best expected goal difference in the league. Even his first season, where he kind of was dealing with a bunch of players that he didn't want at the club because he wasn't able to bring in a full team of new players. And this year, Arsenal are the best team in the Premier League by expected goal difference. Liverpool are right on City's heels, despite Liverpool seemingly losing every key player on their team for months at a time at various points this season. And despite that, City are still favorites to win the Champions League. And I think it's because, like, I think with City, there's been points over all the previous couple seasons where they've had stretches where their underlying numbers weren't great, but it seems like the markets have taken the markets rarely take in just this season when they're looking at Manchester City. They look at kind of the past couple seasons, it seems like, because Pep has been there for so long. And I think with that, when you see City having sort of the second best expected goals numbers in the Premier League, you take into account that they've been consistently excellent for the past decade almost. And I think it's probably right to bump those numbers up a little bit going forward. So long way of saying City kind of just always figure it out and basically perform at the level of the best team in Europe every year, even though now we're kind of late, the farthest we've been into a season without them like very clearly being at that level. But I think that's kind of what we're seeing with them still being significant favorites.
do you think they should be favored to win the Premier League? Because I don't think they are, and they haven't. I mean, they just haven't performed like the best team there, right? Like,
Yeah.
do you think they
I,
should be given credit to bounce back there as well?
I think they are being given decent credit. I think they're think they're still second favorites to win the league after Liverpool, but I think they're just in third, and there's only 8 games left in the season. So, and Liverpool are one of the best teams in the world, would be one of the favorites to win the Champions League. Arsenal are also ahead of City. They're they're the second favorites to win the Champions League. So I think just like making up 3 points and surpassing 2 teams, I think it's just really hard. This late in the season, and City, by some accounts, have probably the toughest remaining schedule of the 3 teams. So I think like clean slate, same schedule for all 3 teams, 8 games left, I would pick City to win the league in that situation. But with them 3 points back, they shouldn't
Right,
be favorites anymore.
right. Real Madrid is obviously no pushover. They're winning La Liga. They are uber talented as they always are. Do you give them a chance in this home and away matchup?
I think they definitely have a chance. I think they've kind of had a weird season where they were like running incredibly hot, just based on expected goals in La Liga that just pushed them way ahead of Barcelona. They were briefly in a title race with Girona, who were also kind of having this like incredibly impressive performance for a team their size, but also like way ahead of way over their skis in terms of finishing and preventing chances, and they eventually dropped off. And then Madrid, like their performances actually improved over the course of the season, and their defense has gotten a lot better since February. So it's weird that like they were winning points at sort of an unsustainable rate with their performances, and then their performances actually started to improve like once it seemed like the league was already in the bag. I think the weird thing about Madrid is that they allow the highest pass completion percentage of any team in La Liga, and pretty much all the best teams in the world press really aggressively high up the field. They disrupt opposition build up play, and that shows up in low opposition pass completion percentages. That's kind of an easy way of determining pressing. And Madrid are literally the easiest team to pass against in La Liga, which is, I think, kind of intriguing for the Champions League, where you usually, what makes it so compelling to me is like all these teams are used to dominating games in their league, right? They're used to having the ball. Pinning the other teams back. And then suddenly they play against teams that have as much as talent as them, if not more. And you're just suddenly in this situation where like your classical playing style, like you can't do it, or you can only do it for portions of the game. While Madrid, like they still have a lot of possession because teams in La Liga don't really try to prevent them from having it. But they also have been quite successful, like not really breaking up build up play in the way that we see with big teams. So I think that's kind of an interesting potential strategic advantage going in to the Champions League, but they were actually pretty terrible against RB Leipzig. I think they were kind of lucky to advance, and Leipzig are not a vintage Leipzig team. And I think we've seen with City, teams that actually do press them can kind of throw them off their game a little bit. So I think like you pair the lack of pressing that Madrid does with City kind of potentially just being able to totally smother them and take them out of the game. I think that's probably how I see things going. But Madrid have so much talent and are like absolutely electric on the counterattack that like they definitely have a shot.
Is it Real Madrid's strategy to just say, look, we have so much talent, we're going to score goals, we don't need to press like every other big modern team now?
Yeah, I think so. Their manager Carlo Ancelotti's kind of, he's like the, I forget what NBA coach is it, Mike D'Antoni, where it's just like you kind of just put your best players out there, you roll the ball out, and you just play the game. That's kind of what Carlo Ancelotti is known for. Like he took over at Bayern Munich after Pep Guardiola left, and Pep is sort of the most demanding coach out there, and it didn't go well, and the players were just like, after training they would be like, so that's it, like we're not going to like be practicing these like insanely intricate patterns that we're going to be dreaming about at night. We're just like, we just like did like we just played like possession and scrimmage. That's it. But at Madrid they do have just a crazy amount of talent, so it kind of has fit the, like Ancelotti's approach has fit really well with the club, and they're good at identifying young talent. They've stopped kind of signing aging guys that were like about to decline for a ton of money. So I think, I don't even know that it's like a lack of strategy. It's just like what happens when those players that he selects are out there on the field.
Oh, so but he's not like pushing them to be like, "Hey, Vinny Jr., you need to press," because that's what everyone else does. He's just
No.
letting them roll.
Yes.
And and then the young players that they're signing are not the type that want to put in that defensive work when you're a center forward. Is that also what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean pressing, I think you do like, it's pressing isn't just about effort. it has to be very coordinated, because if you have three guys pressing three players, but only two of them are pressing in a coordinated fashion, the third defender can easily slip into space, and then suddenly you've just eliminated three players from being able to stop you from attacking. So I think like Madrid are just not practicing these pressing patterns. So like just having a guy run around with everyone else not doing it also doesn't make a ton of sense.
Excellent. Let's move on to Arsenal and Bayern Munich. Bayern Munich has looked pretty terrible. They're not going to win the Bundesliga for the first time in many, many years. Yet they have a very good XG differential. Actually, I think the best amongst any in league of any of the teams in the top five leagues in Europe. So, what do you make of this Bayern Munich team?
It's just so. It's one of the weirder seasons I can remember. I mean, part of it is that Bayer Leverkusen, the team that's going to win the Bundesliga, are, I think, only one other team, and it was one of the Pep Barcelona Bayern Munich teams, have won as many points as Bayer Leverkusen have won this point in the season. Bayer Leverkusen still have not lost a game, and it's not like they're drawing a ton of games either. They're basically winning every game. So that, I think, makes Bayern's season look a little bit worse than it is, because I mean they should still win. They should still be able to win the league, but like it certainly most of the time I think Bayern with the same point gathering rate would be winning the Bundesliga. But at the same time, they haven't been very good in the Champions League. They weren't too impressive in the group stages against like Manchester United, who were terrible. Um, and then what was it, Copenhagen and Galatasaray. Um,
Right.
and
Not a tough group.
no, and Bayern had been lights out in the group stages for the past couple of years. So you do kind of want to work that into your assessment of the team, right? Especially because we don't, it seems like the Bundesliga is, in the Bundesliga, every team or almost every team presses pretty aggressively, which makes for a pretty fun league. Like kind of turn on a random game and you're going to find kind of a lot of action and a lot of space around both goals. But I think it's probably not the optimal way to beat Bayern Munich, I would say. So you get a situation where Bayern Munich have 75 goals this season. I think Madrid and Liverpool have 65, I think. So like they have 10 goals more than anyone else in Europe this season. So I think part of it is like the Bundesliga is just like the structure of the league makes it so Bayern are going to put up like absolutely insane underlying numbers. But at the same time, like their underlying numbers are so good, it's like almost a +2 expected goal difference, which I don't think has ever happened in the league. They're not there, but they're close. And so it's like, would any other team in the Bundesliga be doing this also? Like, I think it's reasonable to ask yourself that. And I think a lot of their underperformance, like their attack is incredible. Harry Kane has made the attack better. And their defense, like the expected goals for their defense are basically the same. They're just going in way more often. So that all is true. And from like all of that, they do seem like the classic, like smart guy, don't undervalue this team pick. But also, like, I hate to say this, but like the vibes are terrible. Like their coach, Thomas Tuchel's leaving at the end of the season. The players are like constantly complaining after every game. They just lost to Borussia Dortmund at home. And as we'll get to, this is one of the worst Dortmund teams of the past decade over the weekend. And so it's just, I don't know. It's just, it's, they're very, very confusing to me. And I think it's more, they're just like a volatile team. Like they could play Arsenal. I mean, it's going to be an interesting matchup because Arsenal are probably the best defensive team in Europe. Bayern are arguably the best attacking team. And like, would it surprise me if Bayern like won the tie 4-1 and just lit Arsenal up in Germany? No. But also, like, would it surprise me if Bayern just like give up 5 goals and score once? That also wouldn't surprise me.
Interesting. Bayern Munich look completely disinterested against one of their biggest rivals in Dortmund.
Yeah.
I'm a Dortmund fan, and I wanted to be more excited about the 2-0 win because it meant a ton for the team. I mean, they're in a tough race to make Champions League for next year, but I really think they look disinterested, which is why it doesn't like what you see from them out there doesn't mesh with the numbers and the XG numbers, which is what's so interesting about this team. You mentioned that they score a lot of goals, and part of that had to do with the style of the Bundesliga. Can you explain that a little bit more? Is it just they're able to break presses and score more goals, or how, because of the pressing, or how does that work?
Yeah, they're like the teams are pressing them high and playing higher lines, so there's just way more space for Bayern to attack into when if they break the press. And I think in the Premier League, Arsenal, Liverpool, City, when they're playing these mid-table, lower-table teams, the teams will sort of press or they'll play what's like called a mid block where you're not sitting deep, but you're not like pressing high. And it's just really difficult to break it down. Like you have to, there's just not space. So you need like players to make great plays. You have to be good on set pieces to kind of take the lead and force them out a little bit, or you have to just like be really good in possession and have these patterns that can break teams down. And you kind of watch a Bayern game, and that it's not that they never face that, but it's just that those questions aren't asked of Bayern as much in the league as they are in other leagues. And you kind of look at all the stats of like how high the keepers are playing out of the box, pass completion percentage, all that stuff is way higher in the Bundesliga. Number of possessions per game, which is a good indicator of like how open the matches are all way higher in the Bundesliga, while the other four leagues are relatively close to each other. So it is kind of a statistical outlier, and I think like it's not unreasonable to like suggest any of this because Bayern's league performance 2 years ago, they were incredible in the league under Nagelsmann. Then they got really frustrated against Villarreal and got eliminated against Villarreal in what was like a pretty even tie. And then last year they kind of just got like easily pushed aside by Manchester City. So I think like normally I'd be like they're just probably really good and we should not worry about the context, but we've seen it kind of fall apart in the Champions League a couple times that it seems like a reasonable hypothesis.
Dortmund plays against Atletico Madrid. Dortmund has been pretty poor in the league this year, but they managed to get out of they managed to win the group of death, yeah, or what seemed like the group of death at the time in Champions League. What do you make of this team, and why are they not favored against Atletico?
They're just not very good would be my main like simple, like I hate to say that about your team, but I
Well,
think
I don't think they're very good. I mean,
you would agree with
they're
me.
certainly
Like,
not as good as the last couple years. There's no way. I mean, you can't lose like a Holland and a Bellingham and be as good, right? I mean, that's going to be hard for any team.
yeah, and like Marco Reus is still a pretty important player for them, and he's approximately like 79 years old at this point. So like you don't have him at his peak anymore. And I mean it's interesting. Like it's kind of an interesting matchup because like these are the two sort of like upstart teams over the past decade and a half that have broken like Dortmund, or I mean, I guess Leverkusen will do it this year, but Dortmund are the last team to beat Bayern in the league, and Atletico are the only team that's won La Liga other than Barca and Madrid's for the past 20 or so years. And so it's fun, like from that perspective. And it would have been fun in like if they played each other in like 2013 or 2014 when Dortmund were like flying high. Klopp was still the coach, and Atletico were like this absolute defensive juggernaut. But now, like Dortmund just aren't as good. They're like one of the older teams in the Bundesliga, and they're supposed to be the team that's where you go if you're a young player and you want to play at a high level and get experience and then move on to a richer team. But they've signed a lot of older players recently, and Atletico are actually just not a very good defensive team anymore. They're allowing over a goal per game this year, which is the highest under Diego Simeone. So like I think it'll probably be a pretty fun tie because I think when imperfect teams play each other in games like this, it actually ends up being really interesting because like neither team is able to like be conservative because they're not like good enough to be conservative. So like things kind of break apart. So I think like there's a decent chance that this is actually the most entertaining tie of the two. And then like, then it's like, okay, you have a knockout round against either Barca or PSG. And like anything can happen at that point. So like they both are not top eight teams in Europe, in my opinion, but they both like have a realistic shot of making the final because of the way the draw has fallen.
When the draw came out, I was absolutely thrilled that the four best teams in Champions League were on the other side of the draw. I may bet some Dortmund futures just for fun because there is a path. I do feel like there is a path. When I look at the Atletico team, I haven't seen them play all year. I actually barely know who's on the team, but I see that they're fourth in La Liga. The XG isn't particularly great. I understand Dortmund's not that great, but um, they're like 64% to advance. So pretty big favorites. Uh, can you make the case for why that should be, or should it be a little bit closer?
It's, I guess if you're gonna like I think they are the better team. Like if I had to, it wouldn't surprise me if they play in Dortmund or better, right? But like my priors for this are that they're the better team, and I guess they're the better team in a way where they actually can generate a decent amount of attack compared to what they used to do. So maybe that actually makes them less likely to be upset than if let's like look at their like expected goal ratio, right? And their skill was coming from mainly from their defense versus their attack. So maybe that's it. But yeah, I don't. Seems a little like overconfident in Atletico, but at the same time, like they were pretty bad against Inter and Inter Milan in the round of 16. To me, kind of looked like a very sneaky Champions League like winning team. Their numbers are absurd. They have the most points of any team in Europe this season. Inter outplayed them significantly in Italy, but only won 1-0. And then Inter took the lead in Spain to go up 2-0 on the tie. And then Atletico absolutely just like smothered them and created a crazy amount of chances, which is like not a thing we've seen them do in the past. So I guess, you have to give Atletico credit. It wasn't like they lucked into a win. They lucked into like not being down by multiple goals going into the second leg. So yeah, I guess beating Inter is, despite Dortmund being in a very tough group and topping that group, also just beating Bayern. I think maybe the Inter win for Atletico, there's like some signal there that this team, they have that capacity to kind of overwhelm you that we haven't really seen Dortmund do too often this season.
Fair enough. Last match is PSG versus Barcelona. This is Kylian Mbappe's last season at PSG before he moves on. It seems like a team that's down from past years. Barcelona's been hit by a ton of injuries. What do you see in this matchup?
Yeah, I've been like, I think Barcelona, their struggles have been partially, it's like a version of the Bayern Munich thing where Madrid were just on like such a heater and Girona were too, that like it made Barcelona's season look way worse than it was. They're on like an 80 something point pace, which is really not bad at all. And they've been significantly behind their expected goal numbers. They actually have a better expected goal difference than Real Madrid do this season. Um, and you take that, and then with PSG are like what I was saying, everything I was saying about Bayern multiplied by like 1,000, where like their monetary advantage over the rest of the French league is like absurd. I did a piece kind of ranking all the teams in Europe based on their sort of points won per dollar spent, and PSG are like significantly the worst team in Europe when you look at it from that perspective. Which like they're just always going to be because of how much money they spend. Even if they won every game, they would still be toward the bottom. But
Interesting.
most of the time, we see PSG just completely dominate the French league. put up absurd underlying numbers, and then it's just like we honestly have no good idea how good this team is because they're just not playing teams that are even remotely close to them. But like this season, they're like rough. They're barely ahead of Marseille in Liga in expected goal difference. Their goal difference is so much far ahead, but like they're as far as we can assess PSG, like this is the worst PSG team we've seen in a really long time, just based on their league performance. But I guess if you're going to write off good league performance, do you have to like potentially write off bad league performance also? Like, so yeah, to me, like they're basically their keeper, Gianluigi Donnarumma, who people might remember, the Italian goalie from the Euros. He's been like insane this season, something like saved over 10 goals, based on the quality of the shots he's faced so far this year. So it kind of gets to Barcelona, I think, are the better team than PSG. There's really not an argument, I don't think, so far this season, but it's a knockout matchup, and being good in a season is not like it correlates very well with being good at knockout games, but it's not exactly the same. And so if you think about, okay, Barcelona are the better team, but PSG have this absolutely insane goalkeeper who's like having one of the like an all-time great season. And then they also have Mbappe, who's the player single most likely to decide a game of any player in the Champions League. Like those are the two like usually like over the course of a season you'd pick Barcelona to win more points than PSG based on this, but PSG have this like god level keeper and then Mbappe, so perhaps that's why they're slightly favored in the betting markets, but it's like what is it, like 55-45 or like 52-48,
Yeah.
something like that.
It's definitely close. When I looked at the injury list for Barcelona, it seems like they will be without Gavi, Pedri, and Frankie de Jong. I don't know. Do you know if that's correct? Because that's basically their entire midfield.
Yeah, Gavi is out for the full season. De Jong and Pedri, I think they could play in one of the games, but it's up in the air.
Okay. Interesting. Ryan O'Hanlon, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast and breaking down the Champions League. Please let everyone know where they can get all your good work.
Yeah, you can read me at ESPN.com. I write columns usually twice a week. You can buy net gains inside the Beautiful Games Analytics Revolution wherever you like to buy your books. That's what I tell everyone. Whatever's the easiest way for you to get a copy, do that. And then also my old newsletter, it's called No Grass in the Clouds at Substack. I now just send out links to everything I write on there. So if you want the ESPN articles delivered to your inbox, that's another way to get them.
I am on your newsletter. I definitely appreciate getting notices of stuff that you've written. I find it nice because it doesn't get lost in your social media, on your X or Twitter or whatever we're calling it these days. So
Yep.
Definitely check that out. Ryan, thanks again for your time.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. Just a quick reminder, you can get my free sports betting newsletter by checking out thepowerrank.com. I will be continuing to do podcasts in the off season, and I will talk to you again next week. Thanks again for listening.